Hi, welcome to another great edition of the Powered Up Coaches Show, brought to you by Sideline Power, your number one choice for coaching communications. On this episode, Tim is joined by Elkhorn South head coach Guy Rosenberg. Listen as Guy details his journey from the Regal Beagle to becoming a back-to-back state champ, as well as how he integrates backups into the program to set them up for future success, and how his program doesn't just put slogans on t-shirts, but they put those slogans into everyday life. It's a great episode, guys, and remember to stay powered up.
Well, this is my first opportunity to interview a coach who I get to call an Iowegian. You hail from Iowa.
Yeah, right.
I know you've got some Nebraska ties as a real young youngster, but you end up Iowa City, you call home. So here's what I want to know, because we as Nebraskans, right, we think game day on Saturday in Memorial Stadium is the only place in the world that you can be. Right. What was game day like, having seen both now? What was it like in Iowa when the Hawkeyes, because you were obviously Iowa City, so a Hawkeye fan. Right. What was it like to on game day Saturday for a Hawkeye fan?
Well, I do think that it was, I think I had one of the few subscriptions to Huskers Illustrated that was delivered to Iowa City. So that was back during the days, early 1980s, when it was a lot easier to be a fan of both, that they only played each other occasionally. But, grew up in Nebraska, and I just thought that Nebraska games were something that you couldn't even go to because they were always sold out. And so I never was to a home Nebraska game until the 1990s. But growing up over there in Iowa City, I was fortunate. It was right around the time that Hayden Fry became head coach at Iowa, so I got a chance to see the things turn around over there under Coach Fry. And really, Coach Osborne and Coach Fry are real big idols of mine as coaches. So that was actually at the 1981 Iowa versus Nebraska game, where Iowa won 10-7 after getting beat 57-0 the year before. So
I listened to that on a transistor radio, by the way, in my buddy's backyard. We took a break in the football game, so I remember this very well.
Right, and I think with Coach Fry, just always, he always had some swagger to him. Had the white pants, had the sunglasses inside, and so I just really admired his courage of being able to, make big calls at big times in the game. But it was a great place to go to games too, and I think that with Iowa City, I think that those fans were very faithful for years and years until Coach Fry went to the Rose Bowl in 1981. They hadn't had a winning season for 20 years, so that there was a lot of support for the program even when that they were struggling. So, and
that was Chuck Long, right, in '81?
Well, that was like, I think Gordy Bohannon, Pete Gales were the QBs there. I think that Chuck Long started playing in 1982, right? I think he was a freshman then, and at that point was with the red shirt rules that I think he became one of the first guys to play five years on there. So 85 would have been his last year.
So what was it like inside Kinnick Stadium, though? I mean, I know you've been to Memorial Stadium. When Iowa, obviously it doesn't have, the 70s were good to Iowa fans, and Hayden Long was Coach Fry was a great coach, but what was it like inside that stadium in comparison to, say, Memorial Stadium?
Well, I think at that time, and again, my appreciation of Nebraska at that point was from afar, for as far as of not having a chance to have been in their stadium until years later. But I think with Iowa and with Coach Fry, it was that process of building. At that point that Iowa was the underdog, and they were on their way up, and so I think that as they accomplished those firsts and made it to the top and made it to the Rose Bowl and really defied the odds, I think that just there was that energy and that enjoyment. I think as with most things in life, that there's nothing like the first time of something there. So I think just getting a chance to be along as a fan and feeling that success. And I think that's something too, even for my own kids, that I've always wanted, is a certain level that I really enjoy being a coach and having some control over the outcome. But I think that there's something pure about being a fan of a team and getting a chance to be fully emotionally invested, even when you don't have any control over the outcome. And that was also, with that being said, huge Iowa fan, but like I said, I had that subscription to Huskers Illustrated. And truth be told, when I went to that 1981 Iowa-Nebraska game, I was going for Nebraska. That I had deeper ties to them at the time, and I was really surprised and disappointed when they got booed when they came on the field, and I was disappointed when they lost, and that was, I'd say on over the years that, when Nebraska did win the national championship, that 1994, that was one of the greatest nights of my life as a fan when they did that, and the enjoyment that came from there. And there was definitely some you got an appreciation from both teams of how that the lows make you appreciate the highs, and just of something I try to tell to our players at Elkhorn South. Just I think a lot of times just the person in the stands doesn't realize how tough it is to win a football game, how many things need to go right. And so I think I just had appreciation for both Iowa and Nebraska, the fact that Nebraska has a lot of disadvantages against it from a college standpoint too, from a competitive standpoint, and just an appreciation of both Coach Fry and Coach Osborne being able to succeed in difficult environments and to do it with class and do it the right way.
It's so good that game gets to be played now every year.
Yeah.
It was a shame back then. Of course, they didn't play all the time because, obviously next door neighbors, and it's turned into a great rivalry.
Right.
But a lot of people may not understand why you were pulling for Nebraska in 1981, and that's
Right.
because you grew up in Peru, Nebraska.
Right.
And so you've said, hey, between the two, Iowa City, you spent a little more time there, so you kind of consider that home.
Right. Well, I think with Peru, I was real fortunate there. It was a great place to grow up as a kid. That Peru State College is there. My dad, who's also was named Guy, was dean of students there at Peru State College and had a couple other titles that were there. And so it was a great place to grow up as a kid and go there and watch Peru State play in the Oak Bowl, and I had a lot of real big, fond memories of that. And I think, really, I guess the reason why I'd consider Iowa City to be my hometown over Peru is just I had a chance to go back to it a lot more. That after we moved away from Peru, we went back some, but didn't get a chance to go back that frequently. And my parents there, we lived in Iowa City, and so when I was in college or when I started working and I came back from college, when it was Thanksgiving or Christmas, I went to Iowa City instead of going to Peru. And so I think that was, and went there, and that's where I graduated from high school and things too.
Well, and there was some good football played there in the later 80s as they ended up winning a national championship down at Peru State.
Right.
But let's talk about what it was like growing up as a kid in Iowa.
Right.
What was the game? What was the game that you played in the backyard or on the street, or were those games played?
Oh yeah, that I think for as far as really enjoyed playing football in the backyard, with my brother Gary, and we had a great neighbor across the street, Justin. Another kid, Brett Christensen, that was there in the neighborhoods. We had some, it was just like that. You hear the stories of playing in the backyard until it gets too dark to play any longer, and so just one of those things where you could tell that the time had passed, where the tree that you had to be careful not to run over when you were a kid because it was too small and you were trying to get it to grow. Now, if you ran into that thing, it would put you in the hospital. So just really enjoyed just playing backyard football.
Did you have a good yard though? I mean,
yeah,
was it wide open,
it was flat.
Yeah,
it was flat for parts of it. Then it had some steep hills on there too. So you had when you're a kid, you had to adjust. You didn't need a perfect field. You had a kind of a wire that was there, an electrical wire that, hey, that's what you kick the ball over for, extra points, field goals, and stuff. So right, so you adapt, and that actually was something was great there too for as far as playing wiffle ball in the backyard too. So it was a great place there.
Was it only football, or were you a guy that loved? Because I know you've got a son that played multiple sports. You got a lot of players that did. Were you that multi-sport guy, or was it football pretty much?
Well, back when I was a real little kid, played for the Peru Pints baseball team when I was there in Peru and stuff on there. And then I'd say once we moved over to Iowa City, it was just over more to wiffle ball, and then started playing football. And then when I was in high school too, that ran track there, and so that really enjoyed running track. It was one of those things, went out for it initially just as a way to get better at football, and really ended up loving the sport. And it's something that my wife Regan is really passionate about it. That track is her favorite sport. She loves going to track meets and just watching all the competition, all the variety of events. And then my son Zane, who's just graduating from Elkhorn South, just this last spring graduated, and he's going to be going to Nebraska Wesleyan and running hurdles there. My daughter, that she ran track this spring, she's going to be a freshman, so that she had to make a choice going into high school, with the track and soccer being at the same time. So she'll be soccer and basketball.
Yeah, track runs deep in your family. But before we get to that, because I want to come back to the idea of track, especially tying into football. Yeah. You end up, going through your high school playing football. Right. You get a chance to play football at Cornell College. Right. So tell me, you've got so many players who go through this decision, right? It's a full-time job. I mean, to go to any college level, it's a full-time job. Was it an easy decision for you, or did you have to work through it a little bit in process and say, this is what I want to do?
Well, I really enjoyed being at Cornell, and I think it was one of those things. I think this last year, going through the college search with my son, we definitely made a lot more visits and put a lot more thought into it than I did back at the time. That Cornell College, it's in Mount Vernon, Iowa, so it's about 20 minutes from Iowa City. It's Division III, so that was something that was more on my level as far as from a football standpoint, and also interesting situation in terms of you take one course at a time at Cornell. I think it's in Colorado College, one of only two places in the nation where you take one class for 3.5 weeks, take a final, get done on Wednesday, and then you're completely done with it, and that you end up you're completely done with that class and you do that 9 times.
I got to stop though,
because
I got to ask you.
Yeah.
To me, that sounds ideal. It sounds
Yeah.
like you could just zero in on one
Right.
class. Was it good?
It was great. It was great because I think on their half was a class that you really enjoyed. Time just flew by, and if it was something that wasn't your favorite, that you were in it for 3.5 weeks. And I think that rather you a lot of times that I think you might think in a school situation, hey, if I could just concentrate, I have so many different subjects I'm juggling. If I could focus in on one, I think I could do better. So it definitely suited me well. I really enjoyed it. My younger brother ended up going there as well, and so it was real positive situation. And we ended up being random roommates with my roommate Rob. We were random roommates. Ended up being roommates all 4 years, and he was Fort Collins, Colorado. So we were roommates all 4 years, and we were in each other's weddings, and still friends to this day. And I think it was back during that time. I think that there were 2 questions on the roommate questionnaire. It was, are you a night person or a morning person, or are you a smoker or a non-smoker? And so, we were real fortunate that we were put together. And
what were you, night or I know you didn't smoke, but night or morning?
I think put down as morning on there. But I also too was just I remember being I was football and he was cross country, and I remember coming back from football practice when we were freshmen, and saw that he had moved in because I'd been there earlier, and saw that he moved in, and it was where that was back with records and cassette tapes. And so I saw his pile of records and cassettes sitting there, and flipped through and thought, hey, you know what, this guy might be all right. And then I found out that he did the same thing when he came in, and my stuff was there. He checked those out, and we thought, hey, you know what, we think it's going to be okay. Even though I think I had the Iron Maiden poster, and he was Howard Jones. So we learned from each other. So
That's right.
Both ended up being a great partnership.
I'm from a little bit of that era, hard rock, and then you had the pop with Howard Jones.
Right,
so
right.
Yeah. You end up going through that, and the football experience in college.
Mm-hmm.
You said to me earlier, and I don't know if you were kidding, you're just being humble here, but you said, listen, I wasn't necessarily a great college football player. And am I taking your word on that?
That's very accurate.
Okay,
yeah,
all right.
Yeah.
So what did you learn? I mean, first off, the fact that you're going through it's a full-time job. You're not necessarily all conference. Right. How did you pull through that? And was it just the pure love of football that got through it? And what did you take from that to this day?
I think it's something I definitely have appreciation for players that are on the team at Elkhorn South too. That football is, I think in some ways, right, you play football because it is difficult, but hey, football is more difficult for some people than others, and just give me an appreciation. Hey, the courage that it takes to persevere, and again that you're just going up a lot more competition than you had in high school that was there. So I think it just gave me a real appreciation of systematically preparing, again getting a chance to form relationships, form a bond, and again just was a real positive experience for me. And I think that also too, that once I did get into coaching, that just I feel in some ways that things that I didn't accomplish as a player, I wanted to try to accomplish as a coach. And so I think that was something that really drove me to maximize any opportunities that I came across in the coaching field.
So you bounce around after you graduate from Cornell. You actually get into coaching. You bounce between Iowa and Nebraska. But tell us about the story of how the Regal Beagle got you to Nebraska.
Right, so I was in Okoboji. So Okoboji, northwest Iowa. There's Lake Okoboji there. It's a beautiful place. It's one of those things that if you haven't been there, you have to set out to go there. And actually, I think people, if they were driving up and approaching it, they wouldn't believe that there's this beautiful glacier-fed lake that's there until you get, just it's cornfields and it's flat, and all of a sudden there you are. It's you pull over the hill and there's this beautiful lake that's there. So was teaching and coaching in Okoboji, northwest Iowa. And was during it's a great place to be during the summer. Not quite as exciting to be there as a young single guy during the winter time. But fortunately for me, I was there at the Regal Beagle. That's the actual. I don't know if they were Three's Company fans.
I was just going to say it sounded like a sitcom bar, but you're right.
Yeah,
it was from Three's Company.
So the Regal Beagle was there, and Reagan, who's now my wife, has been wife for 20 plus years. That's where we first met. Was there at the Regal Beagle. That she had family in the area and worked up there during the summer, and the winter games usually always used to be right around the Super Bowl weekend of the Super Bowl. So she was up there for winter games, and we met, and that eventually things ended up blossoming into the situation where we got engaged on New Year's Eve 1999 there, and then that summer, June of 2000, we got married, and that she was going to graduate school at that point at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and so that was how that I ended up back in Nebraska after being there as a little kid. Ended up being back in Nebraska through meeting Reagan and getting engaged and married.
Well, John Ritter would be proud of that story.
That's right.
But you took this path. Young coaches have two paths that they can take, right? Some say, I want to be a head coach right away. I'll start at an 8-man school. I'll start C2. Others say, hey, I want to go and learn. You chose that path of learning. Was that intentional, or was it just this is the opportunity? And what did you gain from working at Lincoln High and Lincoln East, and then before you headed back to Iowa?
Right. Well, I think even going further back, it was when I was in Okoboji that started off there coaching middle school track, started off coaching middle school football. So I feel in some ways that's helped me too, of having a chance to work at the build a foundation at the lower levels of football. I was an assistant for 1 year and then became the head coach there at Okoboji. And on there, in all honesty, I mean, I think, well, looking back on it now, I definitely wasn't ready for that. That was more than I was ready for at the time. But hey, when you're young, you don't really realize that. And I think the reason why that I got the job, I'm sure there was not a lot of people that wanted it. So it was a thing that we ended up, I think there was a 20-some game losing streak that was going into my first game as head coach. We won that first game. Hey, that was
they probably threw a parade for you on day one, didn't they?
I wish I could have said, yeah, that was the start of a great season, but it was a memorable season. But I think we ended up going 1-7. So we won that first one. But again, that kind of gave me that appreciation of how tough it is to win at any level, and I formed some great friendships and memories there. And so I was the head coach at Okoboji for 3 years, and then, as mentioned, moved down to Lincoln. Was an assistant coach for John Farrand at Lincoln High, and from him I just learned a ton about organization and building a program. And I think even when I moved to Lincoln, and was there coaching for Coach Farrand, that was one of those things that it was already on my radar of, hey, I want to be a head coach again, and I want to be a head coach at the Class A level in Nebraska. And so just really made sure to take note and pay attention and build for when that opportunity came. And I remember actually even before that of coming down to visit Lincoln for my wife, Reagan, is a Lincoln Southeast graduate, and right around when she was in high school, Chuck Mazurski was the head coach, and they were winning championships. And I remember when I was the head coach at Okoboji, that we were down in Lincoln, and she drove me by, Seacrest Field, and said, "Hey, now this is where the big time football's at and stuff. You're doing a
She's selling you.
You're doing a good job.
I like that.
You're doing a good job at Okoboji, but hey, just realize this is a bigger deal down here." And so that made me even more want to excel at that level. So I was with Coach Farron those first 2 years. The whole time I was in Lincoln, I was teaching at Lincoln East. So the last 5 years that I was at Lincoln East as an assistant for John Gingery, and again learned a ton from Coach Gingery about player relationships and positive energy. And I'm very thankful that Coach Gingery was one of those guys too, that once I started doing some research into the spread offense, that he was receptive and willing to try some new things there. We ended up having the perfect trigger man for it in 2005, 2006. Jim Ebke, who ended up being just outstanding, was the Gatorade State Player of the Year and broke the Class A record for total offense in a season there of running some of those shotgun concepts. So I really was fortunate at Lincoln East to be reserve head coach, and then JV head coach, and then varsity offensive coordinator, and again just had a real positive experience there in Lincoln.
So it gets me to thinking as well, because another two schools of thought. So those coaches out there watching who say, do you change what you do for the talent? So you had Epke, and I don't know if Lincoln East that year, no matter who you had, if you were going to go to the spread and throw the ball a lot, or do you stay with what you do no matter what? You make that talent fit what you have.
I think you have to have an offense that has a big enough, offense and defense, special teams, but particularly offense, have an offense that has a large enough scope that you can emphasize what fits your players best from season to season. And in fact, sometimes it might be, particularly with quarterbacks, I think might be a situation where that if there's a injury to a quarterback during the season, and maybe the backup has a different skill set. I mean, I think to me that's what coaching is really trying to maximize players' strengths and minimize weaknesses. But I think with that being said, the underlying bedrock, right, of the program philosophy and what you believe in, I think needs to remain consistent. But I think it's a matter of adapting the talent and adapting from year to year. Another big influence on mine. I heard him just speak at a clinic once, but I've read a ton over the years. Bill Walsh, the 49ers coach, and just talked a lot about how that the competition is a moving target. So, hey, if you're good at something, other people are going to be working to break it, working to stop it. And so you need to spend time in the off season figuring out, all right, what have people done to stop what we do best? How can we protect it? How can we fix it? How can we have a balance of capability? How, if they overcompensate to stop something, how can we punish them and have that act as a deterrent? So to me, I think that's a big part is realizing that. Also, I think it was Mac Brown said one time, if you're not known for something, you're probably not very good. So want to have a strong identity, and things have changed over the years. But I think at Elkhorn South, I think we're always going to be known for physical downhill running game and a team that's going to take some shots down the field in the play action game or the RPO game. So I think it's where we pull our tackles a lot. I think if somebody, for us, if they're playing us, it's, hey, we're going to run a lot of counter. We're going to pull the tackles a lot. So teams need to be prepared to stop that. It used to be back in the good old days when teams just would play 4-2 post safety defense. We were going to throw 4 verticals on them. And so I think it was where they knew that if somebody was going to play us, they knew that they had to be strapped up and ready to go against those concepts. And then, hey, if they take that away, then hat tip, you need to have a counter. And real big believer that you want answers before Friday night. We never put anything in at halftime. It's got to be something that we've practiced, and so that's something I'm a big believer in. Is you work on your contingencies in the off season or during the practice week, not at halftime of the game, because as a player, I think when you know what you're doing, you have confidence. And so I think it's an unfair situation to ask a player to do something in front of 3,000 people that they've never done in practice. And so that's a big cornerstone, I believe, too.
Well, when you say that, it gets me thinking, we as fans who sit on the couch at home and watch football games, who sit in Memorial Stadium and watch a game, we always love to say, those halftime adjustments were amazing. I mean, look at that. This coach really made some great. Is that one of the most overrated statements? Or are there a lot of X's and O's and adjustments going on in locker rooms?
I do think in some ways it's a little bit of both. It's a little bit of both because we're not going to add in a new scheme, but I think that one of the things to do that we run a small enough number of concepts and repackage them a lot of different ways. Well, then I think that the players understand how they work, how it fits together, and I think that when you understand the inner workings of the scheme, you can adjust, right? So that they do have the capability to adjust within that scheme. That we had a few years back that, like I said, we hang our hat on GT counter, like pull the guard, pull the tackle, or a lot of times for us to be guard and rifle, like the backside offline tight end. That's something we really hang our hat on, and we were playing Gretna the year they won the state championship there, and they were doing a great job against us in the first half, and we went through and modified a little bit of the way that we blocked it. George Drennan, senior, who's our offensive line coach, I mean, he's just amazing, great technician, great leader, and great fundamentals and scheme. And so that we talked at halftime, and coach came up with that adjustment. And again, so that was a true adjustment within a scheme. We didn't put in anything new, but there was modification in what we were already running. So I'm a big believer that for the most part, right, that halftime is just going to be more modification, and a lot of times too, it's elimination of what's not working. If it's not working, is it something that we can fix? Or is it something that we should probably just go on and emphasize what is working for us?
Who had the biggest impact on you as a coach? And I know there's a lot of coaches that we may know, but is there a coach that none of us may know? Whether he coached you in or she coached you in any sport. But is there someone that you would say, no one's going to know this person, but man, they had a huge influence on me as a coach, and here's what they did?
Well, I guess that for somebody that worked with me personally, I'd mention Dan Dickel, who was my high school head coach at Iowa City West High. And he was a guy, too, something always that stuck with me is just, well, one, how much he cared about his players, but also, two, that something that I've related on to all the teams that I've coached through the years. He was a guy that was from small town Iowa. He played at Iowa. He was an all Big Ten player. He played in the NFL for a number of years. And he just said, fellas, you know what, that I've played in the NFL. I've played in the Big Ten. I never enjoyed playing football more than I did in high school. And so the fact that he said, don't be in a hurry to get on to the next level. Enjoy where you're at and maximize that opportunity. And that's something that I've passed on to all the generations of the players that I've worked with. So that I think that, and I think he was a guy that probably first saw the ability in me to be a coach, that he was a guy that after I'd graduated from high school said, hey, we're having some camps this summer. Why don't you come back and work these camps? And so I think that that's one of the other things, too, of being a coach is being able to see capabilities in people that maybe that they wouldn't see in themselves. And so that's something I have great appreciation for, that probably would not have gotten into coaching without that nudge from Coach Dickel. So
and that's saying something, isn't it? That even at the NFL level, he's like, look, nothing like a Friday Night Lights. And I have to tell you, Coach, over and over, the coach that sat in that chair over these last 3 months have said that, many of which went on to play college ball and said, there's something special about Friday night.
Right.
Does that emanate with you as well?
I think so too, and it's where one of the things been real blessed at Elkhorn South for a lot of years, had a lot of Ballards that played on our teams. It was a real good football family and great supportive family. And Lisa Ballard was the football boosters president last year and was involved on that booster board the whole time that I've been there. But the first Ballard that was in the program was Connor Ballard, and a summer or two ago he got married and was invited to the wedding, and I went there, and there's all the pictures of the couple and their life, and there was a lot of pictures that showed up there of Elkhorn South football, of his time there. And I talked to him and a couple of his other teammates that were there that night, and I was going to say, hey, fellas, I'm just going to tell you that really meant a lot to me, that all these years later, that's something that's still important to you, that it still has a strong connection, and that you're still connected to it, and just the fact that you're friends all these years later and have this relationship. And I thought it was, one of them said to me, I think it was Connor Ebling, said, well, Coach, maybe that's why we won. That's why we were successful. And that was a real special group, too, that they were freshmen the first year that I was at Elkhorn South, and it ended up being when that group was seniors that we won the state championship there in 2015. So I do think that's one of big beliefs that I have from a team-building standpoint, right, that it does have to be that brotherhood, that investment that I tell a lot of times with the players, say that it's easy to put a slogan on a T-shirt, but can you go out and live it? What do your actions say? And I think that's what makes high school football such a great event to go to. That heard one time that I say too. I teach English at high school level, and I love that. I'm invested in that, but 3,000 people don't show up for English class. It's the thing in there. So, and I think the reason why that people show up, and this is something I tell our players too, that to me that. In some ways, this is a reset button generation. I think it's real easy, whether it's with a video game or whatever's going on. Yeah, I'm going to try this. If it's not going well, I'm just going to hit the reset button and I'll start it again. And with the realization that in football, you can't do that, that in fact that what makes it so pure and what makes the comebacks and the great performances is that you have to learn to overcome that adversity together unselfishly and not go rogue, and to continue to do what you're supposed to do within the team framework. And I think that's what, there's nothing more rewarding than coming from behind and beating a great team, especially on the road. And I think that there's the memories that come from that. But on the other hand, I also tell our guys that I admire the courage a lot of times, that some people, they don't even want to get into the arena because, hey, what if I don't make it, if I don't accomplish my goal, and there aren't any excuses or anything that I can use? Because what if I've done absolutely everything that I can do and it's still not good enough? And to me, that's kind of the ultimate form of courage, that, hey, I'm going to put myself out there, and I'm going to invest with a group of people, and we're going to try to accomplish great things. But if we don't, we had the courage to try, when it's a lot easier for people to sit back and criticize instead of doing. So to me, that's a real big courageous act that's there.
Well, you talk about courage. Since you mentioned the Ballard family, in doing research for this, came across an article. What a courageous family, right? I mean, a couple of the Cole's brothers obviously battled leukemia early on in their childhood, overcame it, and Cole talked about it in this article. I imagine for you as a coach, you talk about courage, you talk about inspiration. These are the things, when you get these players and these families around you, that only inspire you and probably inspire the team as well.
Right. Well, and I think it's too that one of the big important points too for football is to be appreciative of what you have and to help others. And that's something I've been very proud of too with our football boosters. This year, Jessica Marasco is our football boosters president, and every year that we have a gold out, for pediatric cancer, to raise money for a family, and whenever we can, we want to try to make it, where it's a local family that's there. And I think it gives just appreciation when you see the courage that a young kid is displaying in face of life-threatening adversity. It's pretty humbling, and I think that's important too, for particularly as a high school football player, when it's easy to think that, hey, you're 10 feet tall and bulletproof and that nothing's ever going to happen to you. And I think to have that appreciation of the courage that other people around you have, to me reminds me another, similar to like with the Shrine Bowl, that on there I had an opportunity 2016 to be an assistant coach for the Shrine Bowl, and just being around when you hear the story of some of these kids, of all the operations that they've had. And it definitely is one of those things when you're getting up in the early in the morning to go and work on something. It's pretty humbling to think about, hey, I've got things pretty easy here. So
that's right.
I think just that appreciation.
We've talked about the Ballards, but you've had an opportunity, obviously, to coach a lot of standouts. Right. I mean, people that we're reading about in the paper every day, or the online, the on-threes, and that sort of thing. I mean, Ashton Murphy, of course, Mav Noonan, and Teddy Prohaska, and all of these guys. What I'm always curious about, there's so many small-town coaches that might get a D1 athlete once every 10, 15, 20 years. But here you are, and we talked about it before you went on air. You may have more players from Elkhorn South. I mean, you got a ton of guys that are going to be on D1 rosters.
Right.
How is coaching a team like that? Is it different at all versus coaching, let's say, when you started out in Okoboji or even over in Des Moines?
Right.
Is it different when you have these highly publicized standout players? Does that change the dynamic of coaching at all?
Well, I think that it's still a matter of maximizing their talents, of how can we best use these players to benefit the team, right? So what can you do that's best for the team there? And you're right, as you mentioned, I think that we're real fortunate that we're going to have, Elkhorn South is going to have as many or more players on the Nebraska roster than any program in the nation, I think, which is, I'm very proud of that. I'm excited about what Coach Rule is doing, and excited just with, to me, the key thing with those talented players, hey, it's one thing to have talent when talent is really maximized is when it's paired with character. And that's something I'm very proud of with, Teddy Prohaska that you mentioned, Maverick Noonan, being guys that were supremely talented players, but were always the first guy on the practice field, never felt like they had arrived, were always willing to do the dirty work. I think that's a situation, right, when you got talent like that paired with character, and then you pair that, you put that together, couple that with a whole team full of guys that are willing to not just put team first on a T-shirt, but to live it. To me, that's when you can really accomplish some great things together as a team. And I think that's just been one of the real keys to our program, is that we've been fortunate that our great players have always been positive leaders. Mm-hmm. And that's something I preach to our players a lot too, just from a culture standpoint. Well, one, I think you have to be very intentional about culture, that if you aren't intentional about it, that it emerges on its own. And so want it to be a player-driven culture, but we want to help, I guess, shape and influence their ideas and maybe put some possibilities out there that you originally wouldn't think of as, say, a 16-year-old kid. And for this year, another thing our boosters have really supported us with is we have a senior book club this summer. It's a Legacy by, I can't remember his first name, but Kerr is the author, and it's about the New Zealand rugby team. And just it's about leadership. One of the big things that they're big on is that the leaders sweep the sheds. So in other words, hey, if you're a leader, that doesn't mean that you have arrived and you want the other players on the team to serve you. It's important that you serve them. So with the sweep the sheds for the New Zealand All Blacks, that their captains are the ones that clean up the locker room after the game, that doesn't fall to the lowest guys on the team. And so that to me is something there with being intentional with culture to explain what's needed. And also too, I tell our guys, hey, when you're younger, it's okay for you to just be a great player. That's enough. You can just go out and play. As you get older, the other players, the younger players, are going to be looking to you as a model, and so it's important that you're not just a great player, but a great leader. And so you have to be yourself, right? You can't pretend to be somebody you're not. That's the same thing just as being a teacher or being a coach, that if you're pretending to be somebody you're not, people can see through that right away. So each kid has to lead in their own way, but I try to definitely emphasize to our players, particularly, hey, if you've been voted as a captain, that is telling you that the other players on the team trust you, and they want you to have a difficult conversation with them. They want you to hold them accountable. And something I'm a big believer in too. I was just talking with our book club yesterday with our senior guys. Is that I think to me, kind of the two scarcest commodities in our world today are attention and trust. And so think about, with attention, it's a constant battle with all the stimulus that's there,
For
phones,
sure.
everything that's there. So, right, hey, the key thing is, right, to get everybody all in the same room or on the same field, paying attention, not being distracted, being in the moment. And then, big believer, too, that you love a lot more people in your life than you trust. That, to me, to be trusted is the ultimate compliment, because everybody has a lot of people in your life where you might be like, yeah, I love the guy, but, I know that I can't count on him to do this. So, say that, hey, that the ultimate is to be trusted. So, earn other people's trust. So, I feel like, hey, right, if you got all 11 guys on the field that are in the same moment paying attention and they trust each other, you can accomplish great things. The sum can be greater than the parts.
Yeah, that word "but" that comes after a superlative is never good,
Well,
right?
that's the thing also too, that I'm definitely I'm known, I think, for my quotes. I'm kind of a quote collector, and I like building PowerPoints, just to kind of gather all my ideas and use to put together game plans. But one of the things I saw Coach Saban at Alabama, that he said it's the exact same thing. He said, I'm an and but guy. He said that you want to have the sentence about you have and in it. You want it to be, yeah, that guy, he's a great player. He catches everything that we throw, great blocker, and, right, he's always the first guy in at practice, and he helps coach the younger players, instead of, well, yeah, that guy, he can really catch the ball, really goes up and he can block, but, a lot of times late to practice, but we just can't get him to invest in the weight room. So you're right. I think that's key thing we talk about. Hey, what would the sentence about you as a player be? Like, would you want to be teammates with you? And I think just a little bit of that self-awareness and presence.
You talk about being a quote machine here, to use your term. Yeah. Here's something I heard you say, and I want you to explain this. You said panic is contagious, but so is calm.
Right.
Were you talking about Carson Rauner, by the way? Or were you
Well,
talking about
I think that fits in there too. Well, too with Carson Rauner, who's an excellent quarterback for us, going to be a senior this year, and I'm a big believer. I think of that as it too. Right, it's the same thing as a leader on the team, particularly as a quarterback. That the other players are going to look to you as a quarterback to see how are you reacting to this situation. And I think it's the same thing as a coach too. That if it's a tight situation in a game and they look down the sideline, I want them to look at me and say, hey, you know what? That looks like he's got a plan. He's confident. And I believe that that's kind of how I conduct myself down there. And I think it's the same thing too for as far as being a quarterback, or being those leaders on the team that during times of adversity, they're going to look and say, hey, if they're panicking, I'm going to panic too. On the other hand, hey, it looks like they're calm. They believe in what's going on. Then I think that's contagious, and that spreads throughout the team. And I think back to just, I guess, an example of that a little bit would be back during the pandemic. We had an outstanding linebacker, running back, Mekhi Nelson Douglas, was a Division I kid committed to Northern Illinois, and was one of our senior captains, two-way starter, and we were getting ready to play Millard West in the season opener of 2000. I had a seventh period study hall, and my phone rings. Mark Calvoto, who's the principal at Elkhorn South, and again, just does an amazing job. Talk about culture, just a great leader. But so I'm sitting there, my phone rings, and he's like, Coach, I've got some bad news. That this was back during the days where if you were seated next to the wrong person, that you could get quarantined, even if you didn't have any type of positive test.
Yeah.
Said, bad news. We checked. Mekhi was within 6 feet of this person that tested, positive, that was in his seventh period class. So unfortunately, he's going to be quarantined. And so that was right at the end of the school day. I sent out a text to our seniors, brought them down to my classroom, and I said, well, hey, I'm sure a lot of you already know, but just want to let you know that Mekhi's not going to be able to play in this game. And I said, you got 2 minutes. Whatever emotional reaction you want to have, you can have it. You can be pissed. You can be upset. Want to kick over a desk or something, you can, which they didn't. But I said, hey, you got 2 minutes to get it out of your system, and then I need you to set your jaw and realize that all the other players on the team, the younger guys, are going to be looking to you guys to see how you reacted. And so those guys, again, that they set their jaws, and we went and had a great last-second victory over there against the excellent Millard West team in that opener. And again, it was guys stepped up and Jackson Jorth, who was a guy that going into the game was a backup. He scored a defensive touchdown, played a great game, and I think that's something too that a lot of times the guys that are backups, second, third string guys, at unexpected moments they're gonna end up playing a big role. And so I think that's another thing, getting back to just coaching philosophy of making sure that those guys are prepared, that they've gotten the reps in practice. Because again, it's unfair to the kid if you ask him to go turn on the lights and prepare out there when they haven't had a chance to prepare as a player. So I think a kid's going to be a lot more confident when they're prepared. So we really make a conscious effort to make sure the ones, the twos, the threes all rep in practice, and we have scheduled rotations within the game, so a kid knows he's going to play and when he's going to play, and so they're prepared. And that's really helped us out a lot of different times, whether it was like with Jackson Jorth stepping in there and playing well against a top 5 team on the road, or where you talked earlier about shaping the offense to the players, of having it be a quarterback that all of a sudden that he's out there and he's the guy. That Elliott Brown that we talked about earlier, that's down at Nebraska and doing a great job at receiver and as a punt returner, that he was a guy that, again, put the team first, that he knew that probably was going to be a receiver in college, but he played quarterback for us. But it was when he was a junior, Drew Reitz, outstanding baseball family, outstanding family in general. But Drew was our starting quarterback, played a great game against Elkhorn High, ended up getting injured during the process of the game. And so Elliott, who was the backup, that he came in the next game, and it was when we had just gone Class A, and we were over at Millard North, and Elliott did a great job, and that was another big win in our school's history, was over there, playing at the Class A level for the first time, and he was prepared because that he'd taken the reps in practice and was ready to go.
Well, I'm looking for the term that you used. I have seen at least 3 interviews, by the way, and by the way, you're sought after. Everyone wants to interview you, Coach. So I've watched at least 3. You talk about systematic. Sorry,
yeah.
You talk about systematic processes a lot in your interviews, and that was a great example how you lose a star player, but because you have these systems in place and these processes in place, players are adept at stepping in. Walk us through that a little bit, why that's important for any program, whether it's a Class A program or a Class, 8-man C2. Why is that important?
Well, I think it's just kind of what we talked about before, of having answers before Friday night. We talked about at halftime, hey, you want to have your modifications, your adjustments, or your deletions. And again, I think that's something, right, that it's, if you think about it at halftime, it's too late, right? You need to think about the contingencies ahead of time, and that ties back to what I'd mentioned before about with Bill Walsh, right, of, preparing those. How can we protect our main plays? How can we, what are we good at? What are people going to do to stop it? What answers will we have? And I think that gets back to that panic is contagious, so is calm. I think as a quarterback, if you feel like you have the answers to the problems, or an offensive lineman or a coach, right, you're going to be a lot more calm because that you're not being put out there in an uncomfortable situation. And I think too, for as much as people want freedom, would claim they would want complete freedom. I think just as people, that there's a lot more comfort of freedom within structure. I think that we like structure because I think then you can devote your energy to getting better at what you're doing instead of worrying about the uncertainties. So I do think of, just from a practice standpoint with our players, that they know, assuming it's a Friday game, they know, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, exactly what we're going to do and within what sequence. We're going to modify stuff a little bit based on the opponent and what we need to do, but right there, I think that way that they don't have to expend any energy on thinking like, well, I wonder what we're going to do in practice today, or I wonder what we're going to do in our pregame warm-up. Like, for example, that when we're able to play a home game that's relatively close to Elkhorn, we're playing one of the metro schools, we'll usually have all our pregame meetings at Elkhorn South and then get on the bus and go there instead of having them on site, because every site is different and you don't know if you're going to be meeting in a closet or meeting in in a hallway or in a library. So that way we control what we can control, that we have that. I think that there's that way the players, they aren't having to expend that energy on those unknowns. And I think too that where you talked about with the systematic rotation, I'll give a hat tip to this to Jackson Syme. He's a chiropractor that's there in Elkhorn. But he's also, we coached together at Elkhorn South. He's at Elkhorn North. But I think he was the guy behind it, that the idea of systematically rotating players within a game. So a lot of times I think the temptation is, hey, we're going to play our good guys until they get tired, and then we'll pull them out, we'll get them a rest, and we'll put them back in. Well, usually by the time that a guy actually gets tired, he's probably going to be completely tired. You're not going to be able to bring him back off of that edge, and then also too that we want our guys to play offense and defense. So the defensive coach is going to say, well, let's rest him on offense. The offensive coach says, let's rest him on defense. So we basically have things charted out for 6 series per half on offense, 6 series per half on defense. And so a kid going into the game knows, for the most part, the game script can change a little bit based on the number of series per half and the situation of the game. But for the most part, knows that, hey, out of 6 series on offense, I'm going to play this many series on offense. I'm going to play this many on defense. And so I think, once again, hey, that there's a reduction of uncertainty before the game even starts for those players, and also an increase of motivation. Instead of, hey, be ready, we're probably going to play in the first half, you're going to know, all right, I'm going in the 3rd series at wide receiver.
Right.
So I think that gets back to that trust where players then, hey, I need to be ready. I don't want to let my teammates down, because it's not an abstraction that I'm letting down. It's, hey, that I need to be ready. And so we rep those guys in practice so that they are ready when they were called on.
So let's talk directly to that coach who's listening and like, this is great. Your Class A roster, you've got a lot more depth than I do at, say, C1, C2. Right. What would you say to them if you're like, look, I don't have the luxury. I don't know if my sophomore's ready to go in and spell that senior linebacker. There's some talent there, but he may not quite be ready. Would you still have a system in place for that to build depth, or would you say you got to make some tough choices?
Well, easy for me to say now of having a bigger roster of players, but I would like to believe that if I was coaching a smaller roster of players, I would, in some ways, I think it would be even more important to do at that level, just because, I mean, guys aren't going to be effective playing every snap, both sides of the ball for on there. And I think one way that you can, you can substitute guys back in high leverage situations if you need to. Hey, your defensive guy, put him in when the other team gets inside the 20. Or, let's look at from an offensive standpoint of maybe that sophomore kid, he might not be able to do everything within your system. What's he good at? Well, hey, maybe just when that kid's in there, he's mainly running jet sweep or, from the slot, or maybe that, hey, he's good at running this pattern. So just sometimes, right, you need to do that, of have it scripted out. That I've done this too, of having, hey, by series, hey, for this series, we're going to run these concepts because that's what these guys are good at. This next series, we're going to do this during series 3, this during series 4. And I think that just makes it where, again, you're putting a kid in a position to be successful. And for the most part, I think, I don't think there's ever been a time where we've asked a kid to go in and they haven't, we've always been pleasantly surprised. And that's one of the things that we spend a lot of time doing during the off season is, hey, we know who, like you talked about Ashton Murphy. Well, hey, we know that Ashton Murphy's going to start on O-line and D-line for us. Well, hey, who's going to be his backup? So we need to find. So when we go down to Nebraska team padded camp, we're looking for, hey, who can be the backup at those positions? And one thing that we've done even more, that haven't always done it, but sometimes it's ended up being with our backup quarterback, trying to play him in the 4th series of the first half, no matter what the score is. So he gets a chance to be in there, game time, surrounded by the upper level guys, and getting a chance to get a feel for the game. And that's really served us well. That first state championship that we won, Connor Ebling was the starter at the beginning of the year. He ended up getting injured. Braden Wright was our backup, but again, he'd played early in games, and again had that experience. So again, that way that he's going to be confident in what he can do, and sort of the other players around him.
So you take me right into those state championships in 15 and 16. In 2014, though, you lose in the first round of playoffs.
Right.
Certainly a successful season, but didn't go as deep in the playoffs as I'm sure you wanted to in 2014. Then that 2-year run, 2 state championships back to back. There's a guy named Bobby Knight who said, nothing good comes from losing. And there's a lot of coaches that don't agree with that. I'm curious, in 2014, how did that season help you? Even though it didn't end on a winning note, but how did that season help you for 15 and 16?
Well, I do think sometimes too, talking about Nebraska football, just University of Nebraska, at some level, hey, with the 1993 team losing last second to Florida State, in some ways that was that adversity in some ways of the unfinished business, and where they had the time on the clock there. In some ways, that provided that motivation to reach those high heights. And I think, just to tail to what you had mentioned there, that another guy I'm an admirer of is Marv Levy, the longtime Buffalo Bills coach.
Listen, you talk about English teacher, you talk about reader, literature, this guy was it.
Yeah, and he actually went to College, which is the big rival of Cornell. Co's in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. But I'd read a couple books by Coach Levy, and that one of the things that stuck with me, that's something that, of course, that he got almost to the mountaintop several times there with the Buffalo Bills and lost in the Super Bowl, and just of how devastating that was. And of course, he's an English teacher, and so he had a poem, and I don't remember the poet or all the exacts on it, but I actually sent it out to all the other coaches on our staff after we'd lost at Beatrice in that first round in 2014, and said, hey, I know things are tough right now. I can't believe we're not all going down to practice together. And it's one of those things, sometimes even all the years later, a lot of times I'll get pretty emotional thinking about it. But just on there was it was about Sir William, who was a knight, and he was a thing, hey, I'm wounded, but I'm not yet slain. I'm going to lay here on the ground and bleed a while, then I'm going to rise and fight again. And that's what we kind of talked about as a coaching staff and to our players. Hey, this hurts, we're down, but I can't tell you how exciting it was to kind of resend that same email a year later, being state champions with all those same guys, where we all invested together. And to me, that's what it's all about, striving greatly together for a common purpose and accomplishing. And there was definitely a lot of adversity, within games along the way to that, comebacks during the regular season and the playoffs, and we were behind at halftime in the state championship that first year too. So I think that's a big thing, again, of that gets back to that trust factor of, hey, we've got a plan. There's no 12-point plays that we can run or anything in here. Just everybody's got to do your job. If you try to do somebody else's job, you try to modify it, it's not going to work. And so to me, there's that courage and that self-discipline and that trust. I'm going to trust my training, the coaches, the system, my teammates, and I'm going to do what needs to be done, and with a sense of urgency, but not being in a hurry.
So give me a piece of literature that every football coach, any kind of athletic coach, should read. Let me break this down. Give me a piece of literature a football coach should read, and then give me a piece of literature that any coach should read. Okay, well, isn't maybe directly.
I think, Sun Tzu, The Art of War, I think there's a great one just from a strategic framework and human psychology and how people operate and how conflicts. I know football, obviously, it's not war on there, but it is a conflict, and it's physical. And so I think there's a lot of lessons there that have stood the test of time. And then I guess the football one would be Bill Walsh, The Score Takes Care of Itself, because that's something, believer too, gets back to that idea of process, preparation, trust of the system. That hey, if you stack great practices together, you're going to play great games. You have a great off-season. We've talked a lot to our players of we want to get more out of our hour than the opponent gets out of their hour. Everybody has the same amount of time to prepare the off-season, the practice week. So how can we maximize that time? So if we maximize our hour in the weight room, we stack all those together, we maximize our conditioning camp, we maximize fall camp. Well, I think if you do all that and you execute together and you trust the system, that, hey, every once in a while, right, that football is funny shaped, it's going to take funny bounces, things are going to happen. Hey, sometimes you might work as hard as you can and you might have a great plan and you still might lose. But I think that over the long run, right, if you have a great process and you have people that are bought into it, that you're going to have success. You talked about that the great assembly line comes before the great car. So you've got a great assembly line, you're going to build great cars. That if the score will take care of itself if you get everybody doing what they're supposed to do for unselfish reasons.
I like it. All right, we're going to do something called 3 and Out, Coach.
Okay.
Now, every coach, if they're on the defensive side of the ball, they love 3 and Out. So we're going to see how you do here. We got 1st and 10.
Okay.
Here's the first one. You only have one choice here. You can read nonfiction the rest of your life, or you can read fiction the rest of your life. What are you choosing?
I would say I'm going to read fiction, just because I think that I can get my fill of nonfiction through watching videos on football, watching lectures. So I'm going to kind of cheat the system on there. So I just think that there's so much we can learn vicariously through other people's struggles, and I think that's just. And again, hey, full disclosure, I teach American Lit, I teach English 9. So I'm also a big believer, and I know that our players would tell this too, that I'm a big believer in the power of stories. I think that people remember stories, and that they're a lot more receptive to them than lectures. That quick side story on this one here, but so it's where we're getting ready to, that 2016, we're getting ready to go down and play a great York team in York to open up the 2016 season. Just had won the state championship.
Coach Snodgrass team.
Yes, yeah. Always extremely well coached and physical, And so that there's a little pep rally in the Commons there, and our quarterback at the time, Braden Wright, he's up there, and our AD, Roger Ortmeyer, who's built, does an amazing job. He says to Braden, so what do you guys are going to York tonight? What can we expect? And Braden says, well, we're going to bring our checkerboards. So I could tell Mr. Ortmeyer was kind of like, all right, that's good. All right, hey, let's go get him. And so afterwards, I'm like, hey, so Roger, you probably wondered what the heck Braden was talking about. So this was a story that I took. There's a guy, Tony DeMeo. He's an East Coast football coach guy, old school guy, but really big into stories too. But he just talked about, this was when George Allen, who ended up being a great football coach, he was, I can't remember, I think he was at West Point or Annapolis, and he had heard that Albert Einstein lived in town. And one of his goals, he always wanted to play checkers against Albert Einstein. So he finds out that Einstein lives in town, and so it's Sunday. He's dressed in his military outfit. He finds out where Einstein's house is, walks all the way across there, knocks on the door. Mrs. Einstein opens the door, and he said, "Ma'am, you don't know me, but I was wondering, is Mr. Einstein here?" And he's surprised when the wife says, "Yeah, that he's right here." So Einstein comes walking around the corner. He's got the Einstein hair, the flow,
right.
and he says, "Mr. Einstein, you don't know me, but I just want to let you know that one of my goals has always been to play you in checkers. Would you play checkers with me?" And Einstein looks at his watch. He says, "You know what? Actually, I don't have anything going on this afternoon. I would love to. Why don't you come on in?" And he says, "Did you bring your checkerboard?" And the George Allen's like, "Well, no, I don't have it with me." And Einstein, "Well, sorry, I don't have one, so I guess you're out of luck. Have a good rest of the day." Closes the door. So George Allen made it his point from then on. He was always going to be prepared for the situation. So he was going to bring your checkerboard. By the time you get to the game, by the time you get on the bus, by the time you walk across town, if you're not prepared, it's going to be too late. And so that just meant a lot to me that it was pretty much a year after I had told that story, and that Braden Wright, our quarterback, had remembered it and taken it to heart, because again, it would be not your typical response you'd expect from a high school player getting ready to go play a football game. But I'm just a big believer, right, that people are hardwired to learn from stories, where like a lecture, most times that people are going to be a little standoffish to that. I think we'd rather hear a story than get some advice.
So I imagine those PowerPoints you like to put together all come with a little bit of a thread, right?
For our Offense 101, there's usually some intentional culture that's in there too. But and again, I think that's one of the. I think a lot of times, sometimes people say, well, why have there been all these big advances, like in the number of players, like Nebraska high school players playing college football at a high level? And I think there's a lot of factors, but one of the ones I think too is just as coaches, there's great coaches here in Nebraska at all the high schools, and I think it's just a lot easier to find what you're looking for online. On there that you can find. There's all types of coaching materials that are available, whether it's fundamentals, scheme, and that's something for me. And don't get me wrong, I love like watching Netflix with my wife and family too. But I really some people binge watch a Netflix episode. I'm going to probably binge watch some all 22 coaches film and kind of learn and see what other people are doing and how they're doing.
I like that. How you cheat, how you get your nonfiction in that way. That's
both.
good. Yeah. Well, listen, you've got a little Iowa blood in you, so now we're looking at 2nd and 7. Mm-hmm. You got a little Iowa blood in you, got Nebraska blood, so this will be a good one. You get 50-yard line tickets, 50-yard line seat tickets. They're free, and you've got to pick. They're all played at the same time, all right? Mm-hmm. So you got to pick. Which game do you go to? The 71 Nebraska versus Oklahoma game, the 2003 Iowa versus number 4 ranked Michigan game, which Iowa wins, or the 2006 Ohio State versus Michigan game, 1-2, that went down as a nail biter. Which one you picking?
That one's easy. I'd go to game of the century on there. 71 Nebraska versus Oklahoma. That I've definitely read a lot on that, and gone back and watched the films on it, and too that Johnny Rodgers was always my dad's favorite player on. So that one that'd be a great opportunity to be back there and see two of the the greatest college teams of all times square off. And I think too, I don't remember if it was that year, but I think it might have been where Oklahoma might have averaged like 470 yards rushing per game. So seeing kind of the wishbone in its prime and all those great players out there that I would love to get a chance to be there.
Yeah, the great Lyle Brimser, by the way, in the call with that one. So here's the last one. Okay. You are now the Big Ten commissioner of football.
Okay, all right.
You get to add one team to the conference. Any team in the country you get to add to this Big Ten conference. You can't say USC and UCLA because they just got added. Yeah. But outside of that, we're going to go to 17 teams now. Who's the 17th you're adding?
That one's a lot tougher on there. Let me think for a second here of somebody I'd want to get a chance to see play. Well, now this one, I'm not sure how long the guy would be here, but I've learned a lot from studying Lane Kiffin's offense at Ole Miss. So on there, I would probably say that would be Ole Miss would be added, so I could watch their offense in person. But I would put an asterisk and cheat the system on this one that if I would have a escape clause that if Coach Kiffin goes to a different school that I can
back out.
I can substitute somebody else in. So, yeah.
Wherever he goes,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Pulling the SEC
right,
to the Big Ten.
right,
I love it.
right.
I love it. Coach, this has been great.
Really
Learned a ton, and clearly, I heard Bob Jensen, the great Bob Jensen, the interview you did with him. From Huskerland Bob,
Right.
He said, look, there's something that's very consistent. We always know Elkhorn South is going to be right there, and there's a reason for it. With the approach to your youngsters and to the players you inspire and coach. So anyway, it's been a joy, and thanks for coming on the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me on, and with Bob, I mean, just what a great guy, keeper of the flame of the game of Nebraska high school football. So just really appreciate him, and appreciate you having me on. This was great getting a chance to talk. So
Absolutely.
This was really
Thanks,
fun.
Coach.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you.